Hello and welcome to the final part in the series of videos I'm putting out this week, where I break down all the fights taking place this weekend at the UFC from a betting perspective. Now, I've already covered 9 fights on this card, which you can find in part 1, 2 and 3 of this video. I'll leave a link to all those videos in the description below, and I'll be covering the final 3 fights in tonight's video. It is currently just gone midnight here in the UK, the day before UFC Ottawa takes place, and I am staying up late like I always do the day before an event to adjust my sleep cycle. So as you know, I earn the majority of my money live betting on the UFC, and unfortunately here in Europe the UFC is on very late. So to give you an example, tomorrow night's card doesn't start until 10 PM UK time, which means it'll probably run until 4 or 5 AM in the morning. So I like to stay up late the night before. I'll sleep in until Saturday afternoon. I'll probably wake up at 2, 3 PM, something like that. And then I'll be fresh and ready to go throughout the night to make good betting decisions in live betting, so that hopefully me and my elite members that tail my live betting tips every weekend can absolutely crush it. We have been crushing it throughout the whole of 2019. In fact, we've been crushing it for 5 years now. And hopefully this weekend is going to be another big event. But just a few things that I want to talk about before we get into today's video. Obviously, I am looking forward to this Invicta event that starts in around 45 minutes time, 1 AM in the UK. This Invicta event is something I've been looking forward to for a long time. I'm actually more excited about Invicta this weekend than I am for the UFC event, because Invicta are holding a one-night tournament. So 4 strawweight fights, all competing in a one-night tournament to become the Invicta strawweight champion. There's a few ex-UFC fighters in the tournament, like Danielle Taylor, Juliana Lima. Who else have we got? I think Kaylin Curran. So there's a few ex-UFC fighters in there. Looking forward to seeing how this tournament plays out. So I'm going to be going and enjoying watching that in 45 minutes time. So check it out when this video goes live. The event probably will have already started. And also I want to let you guys know that, as promised, I will be doing a live stream where I answer all your questions about the fights taking place on the UFC card this weekend, as well as work hard to get you a decent prop bet for all the fights taking place this weekend. So if you don't know what a prop bet is, prop bet would basically be something like Donald Cerrone to win inside the distance. A prop bet is just a highly specific bet. Now, I hope that I know I said all week that I was going to do that on Friday night because I was very busy on Saturday, but I am no longer going to the Cardiff City versus Crystal Palace game on Saturday. My dad just didn't want to go anymore, so I am now free to do the live stream on Saturday. So here you can see it is scheduled in currently for 7 PM on Saturday, which is around about 3 hours before the UFC event is scheduled to start. If you come to my channel pages, youtube.com/Diary of a Pro Gambler, the time displayed here should be the time that this live stream will go live in your time zone. And I really wanted to do this on Saturday instead of Friday, because obviously if I did it on Friday, you know, people in different time zones may be working or asleep, and sorry, my nose is really itchy. I don't know why. It's dusty in here. By doing it on the Saturday, a few hours before the event takes place, I just think there's more chance that more people across the world in different time zones will be able to watch it, which is really cool. So it's going to be tomorrow night around 3 hours before the event takes place, so check it out. Now, I think that's everything. As always, if you could hit the like button below, it would mean a lot to me, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. But let's get into the first fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is Juan Adams against Arjan Bhullar. Now, where to start with this one? So Juan Adams, quite honestly, could be amazing. In Juan Adams, I see a fighter that could be a potential future champion, and I will talk about the reasons why for me it's only potential in this betting video, but the ceiling on Juan Adams could be very high. And the basic reasons why I'm so high on Juan Adams is because he's only 27 years old, so he's still very young, still got a lot of time to improve. But more so than that, he is absolutely enormous, and I mean that in the best possible way. Juan Adams has got the perfect body type, the perfect wingspan for MMA. Now, you've heard me use this analogy a lot about long, tall, abnormally long and tall fighters being amazing for for MMA if they can also grapple and learn how to use their length. And at this stage in their career, I'm not going to go any further into what Juan Adams brings to the table yet in terms of skills. But what I would say is he's 6'5", and he's got an 81-inch reach, which is basically the perfect wingspan for MMA. He's abnormally tall for the heavyweight division. And if this guy can learn to fight long and also grapple at a high level, he's a nightmare. Historically, guys that are abnormally tall for their division, they tend to either be 9 times out of 10, they tend to have really bad takedown defense because obviously they've got a long, lean, skinny frame, which makes it easy to shoot in deep on their hips with a takedown and upset their balance. But every once in a while, a unicorn comes along, like an Israel Adesanya, like a John Jones, like a Montel Jackson, or like a Roosevelt Roberts, who we saw last week, who these guys are abnormally tall for their division, and they can also wrestle their asses off. And they're unicorns. They're very, very special because the majority of guys with this body type, like a Curtis Melender, like a Stefan Struve, like a Jalen Turner, they tend to have really bad takedown defense with this body type. So if you get a long, tall fighter with this kind of wingspan that is also able to wrestle at a high level, they could be a unicorn. And I think we might have another unicorn with Juan Adams because this guy is a former NCAA Division I wrestler. So his wrestling is at a very high level. And for a guy this big to also be a strong grappler is quite a scary prospect, to be honest. This guy is definitely future champion material. And if we look at today's weigh-in, or the face-off, they didn't really have a ceremonial weigh-in, but here we can see obviously Juan Adams on the right hand side absolutely towering over Arjan Bhullar, so he's got a massive size advantage in this fight, which could be a really, really big deal. He is a big boy, absolutely no doubt about it. So how do I want to break this fight down? Because there's a lot to say. I want to make sure it makes sense, the order I go through this. So, Arjan Bhullar is obviously branded as quite a strong wrestler, and he is a decent wrestler. Doesn't blow my hair back, but there have been comparisons to him and Daniel Cormier, which I think is absolutely ludicrous. Arjan Bhullar may be a strong wrestler, I'm sure he is, but that doesn't always transition well into being an MMA wrestler. For me, Bhullar has been quite underwhelming in his fights so far in the UFC. Bhullar is one of these guys that really struggles to shoot in deep on his opponent's hips. He's more of a grinder that pins his opponent up against the cage or chips away at them, but he's not really that athletic, not really effective at getting his opponents to the ground. He does have a heavy top game, but not particularly great at taking his opponents down. And with Juan Adams being so tall, so long, being able to create such a wide base against the cage when defending takedowns, and also with him having that NCAA Division I background, I don't really see Bhullar being able to take Adams down. Also, against Adam Vicharek, Bhullar was submitted by an omoplata, which is really a technique you never see used effectively in MMA. I mean, I could probably count on 3 fingers the amount of times I've seen someone submitted with an omoplata in MMA. It's very, very rare, which just speaks to how green Bhullar might be on the ground. So I'm sure he is a strong wrestler, but the technical skills are not quite there to compete at the highest level of the sport. And obviously, with him being 6 foot tall with a 75-inch reach, he's quite small for a heavyweight, and that's why Juan Adams towers over him, and Adams will have a huge 6-inch reach advantage. Also, I'm not really that impressed by Bhullar's striking. Doesn't really carry that much power in his hands for a heavyweight, which is one of the reasons why, a lot of his past fights have gone the distance. Not really particularly dangerous standing. I don't think he can cause Juan Adams much of a problem if this fight stays standing, even if Juan Adams does start to get very tired, which brings me on to the next point that I want to talk about in breaking down this fight, because for me there's really no question that Juan Adams has every advantage in the book really in this fight. He is a significantly better striker than Bhullar. He's got the wrestling credentials and the size to hang with Bhullar, and obviously the size advantage is also a big deal as well. But there are some issues with Juan Adams that I want to talk to you about and show you some evidence of there being issues now. So, in his UFC debut against Chris De La Rocha, Juan Adams did gas out after the first round. He looked very, very tired early in the second round. And I can't be too harsh on him here because, as you can see, prior to this fight prior to his UFC debut, his last 6 fights had ended in the first round. So he didn't have a lot of experience going deep in a fight, didn't have a lot of experience managing his cardio and pacing himself because he was so used to blowing guys out of the water very early on in the matchup. So no surprise that Juan Adams gassed out after one round. Also, this was his UFC debut. Octagon jitters and a real thing. Adrenaline dumping is a real thing. We would never expect to see a fighter at their best in the UFC, in their UFC debut. So no surprise that Juan Adams did show some chinks in his armour. But let's investigate this topic first, because if Juan Adams were to show up with cardio for 3 rounds, I think he would absolutely dominate this fight. But if he gasses out after round 1 like he did against Chris De La Rocha, Bhullar should win. Bhullar could cause him some real big problems. So the rest of this betting analysis is really going to be trying to dig deeper into what are the chances that Adams shows up with improved cardio, or is he going to look like he did against Chris De La Rocha? So the first clue that we look to is just a clip from an interview with Juan Adams after that fight against Chris De La Rocha. So I am just going to play this clip for you here so you can listen to what he says.
I got up to 305 after Contender Series. Like I said, man, it's pretty well known. I love to party. I like to have fun. I go out a lot, so Taco Bell, his first stop after here, and then I got a whole box, like 4 or 5 boxes of Little Debbie's up in my room right now, so I can't wait.
Is the partying something you might have to dial back on a little bit?
Definitely. So last time we partied, I partied for about 6 weeks after that one. This time I'll give it 2 weeks. Go from there. I had kind of went on a toilet pipe. I had a few ladies in my DMs from across the country. After Contender Series, I had more money than I had in a while, so I took some trips. Is what it is. This time I won't do that. I've got a girlfriend, so no toilet pipe, and I'm just going to be chilling.
What do you make of the heavyweight division landscape?
So that was Juan Adams after his UFC debut against Chris De La Rocha, where he basically admits to liking to party. He said he actually partied for 6 weeks after his Contender Series fight, which is kind of crazy for a professional athlete to behave in that way. And he also said that his first stop now after winning that fight was to go to Taco Bell and eat total shit. Also, he said that he's got a load of junk food waiting in his hotel room for him. So this is a big concern, and obviously the fact that he likes to party, the fact that he's quite open about having a bad diet, is perhaps a clear indicator that is the exact reason for Juan Adams' bad cardio in his UFC debut against Chris De La Rocha. I mean, he certainly isn't conducting himself and handling himself like a professional athlete. And after that fight, he said that, he won't go on another partying tear like he did after his Contender Series win by partying for 6 weeks. He's just going to only party for 2 weeks and then see how it goes. But again, that's not really the sign of a professional athlete for me. It's not really a good attitude for a professional athlete. And then here, in this week's pre-fight week interview with MMA Junkie, he talks a little bit more about what he learned from his UFC debut. So I'm just going to play this clip for you now. So listen to it straight from the horse's mouth.
Number 2, let's just go back to the first one a little bit. The longest fight of your pro career so far. You got the finish still, though. But what, as such a young guy, what does experience like that do for you in terms of your growth and your development?
I mean, it just shows me something else I need to work on and how far I can really go. That was such a weird fight for me. No contacts for one, the adrenaline dump of fighting on that big stage. Second round just felt like I was moving in quicksand. But when the third round came around, I was like, oh, all right, I got it back. So then all that went through my head was like, energy's back, cool. As soon as I touch him, it's over. That's what we did. So, we train for moments like that. We always train for the worst case scenario. And now that we know, something we could be very specific on this time and really work on. And I'm glad it happened. I'm glad I still got the win. And normally in a learning experience like that, it's not as fortunate for people.
Right. So UFC fight number 2 this week. Does it feel any different? Like even that little bit of experience doing this
It
once?
feels so different, man. Last time I came in, I was like nervous for everything. I was anxious. I was worried about the weight cut. You know, I was like, you know, super irritable, super agitatable. You know, always irritated, moving around. Right now, I just feel awesome. You know, I can't wait for it to. I mean, I just can't wait for the fight to be here. I'm excited. I'm calm. I feel great about everything, and it just feels world different.
Yeah, you cut down to 265, right?
Yeah. I landed at 278. I was 277 this morning. I gotta go work out, do 2 or 3 workouts today, get down there, but I'm feeling good.
Yeah, not many heavyweights cut down to the limit. You're probably one of a handful in this division. Is that an advantage for you, or what does that help you with?
I don't know if it's that big of an advantage for me.
So we'll stop it there. But as you can see, Juan Adams was just talking about the fact that he says he adrenaline dumped in the UFC debut against Chris De La Rocha, and he got very tired, which I could completely understand. You know, it's his UFC debut, first time competing under the bright lights of the UFC. He said that he was feeling nervous and anxious for that fight, so definitely possible that he gassed out because he adrenaline dumped, but also with him liking to party and not possibly having the best diet. Probably a combination of things. So in that video there you just saw that was released on Thursday, you know, just yesterday, Juan Adams said that he learned a lot from his UFC debut, learned a lot about gassing out, and that he was going to make some changes. But then today on Juan Adams's Instagram, we can see here that he is eating in some bullshit restaurant, treating his coach to some meal in a diner, you know, which obviously isn't great. He's saying we made weight, and he's treating his coaches to like some kind of breakfast, which obviously is an indicator that he hasn't cleaned up his diet that much. And then also he posted a picture here saying that it's his post weigh-in collection. He just needs to get some whipped cream, so indicating that this is all the food that he's going to binge on now that he's made weight, which is also a bit of a concern. Now, what I would say is obviously Juan Adams has identified that he needed to make some changes. He's identified that he gassed out after his UFC debut, and in his pictures on Instagram, he's definitely showing signs of being in better shape for this fight. Here you can see him with some muscle definition, some abs in his stomach. There's a lot of pictures of him with that in Instagram, looking very, very good compared to his UFC debut. You know, if you go back and watch how he looked in his UFC debut, he did look very soft, but obviously looking in better shape on Instagram. But with him potentially not making the best career choices outside of the octagon with his diet and lifestyle, that's a bit of a concern, because if he gasses out after one round against Bhullar, he is in big trouble. So this fight is actually, the way I look at this fight from a betting point of view, is very, very similar to how I look at the Donald Cerrone versus Al Iaquinta fight. Not in terms of styles, but in terms of the gambling logic that you need to apply to this kind of matchup. I'm just going to make sure my mic is not muted. Just in terms of the gambling logic with this matchup, I find it's a very similar fight to the Donald Cerrone versus Al Iaquinta fight, because in the Al Iaquinta versus Donald Cerrone fight, we've got a fighter in Donald Cerrone who I personally believe is significantly better in terms of skills than Al Iaquinta everywhere. I believe he's a stronger wrestler, a better complete grappler, and a significantly better striker. But the risk with Cerrone comes with the X factors, you know, his motivation, his consistency, his mental state, the fact that he has to kill himself to make that 155 pound lightweight weight limit. All these things are a worry for Cerrone. His skills aren't in question. The question with Cerrone is whether he's going to be able to show up and perform to his full potential on fight night. And I feel that's the same with Juan Adams. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that Juan Adams is better than Arjan Bhullar everywhere, and he can dominate this fight wherever it takes place. But has he prepared correctly? Is he coming in with a cardio to fight at a high pace for 3 rounds? You know, if Arjan Bhullar drives him into the cage and forces him to work in the clinch for that entire first round and tires Adams out and wears on him, how is Adams going to look in the second and third round? So for me, this weekend, Juan Adams and Donald Cerrone are very similar kind of bets. They've got the skills to win, but will they show up in the right condition and mindset to win? Now, you're probably thinking, based on what I've just said, Juan Adams is going to be a good bet this weekend because I've already recommended a small bet on Donald Cerrone. And you would be wrong, just for one slight detail here. When I tipped Donald Cerrone to win 3 days ago, his odds were around about 2.10 across all betting websites, which was plus 110, giving him an implied probability of 48%. And I personally cap Donald Cerrone at having around a 60% chance of winning this fight, simply because he's better than Iaquinta everywhere, but the X factors mean there is a considerable amount of risk there. But because I cap him at 60% and the implied probability is 48%, by betting Cerrone at these odds, we're getting a 12% margin over the betting sites. There's definite value there. However, if we look at the current odds on Juan Adams, his average odds around about the best you can get at the moment is 1.80, which is minus 125 for an implied probability of 56%. Now, I also cap Juan Adams at around about a 60% chance of winning, exactly like Donald Cerrone, but as you can see, because the implied probability is 56%, there's not as big a margin there. With Cerrone, we're getting a 12% margin because the odds are much better, whereas here we'd only be getting a 4% margin over where I cap him, and personally, I like to get a bigger margin than that, because with bets like this, where there is a lot of risk, like a lot of these bets will lose. So Donald Cerrone, I am not like pinning my mast pinning my flag to the ground and saying Donald Cerrone will absolutely beat Al Iaquinta. I am capping him at having a 60% chance of winning, which means there is a significant chance that he can lose, and I understand that, but I feel the risk is worth the reward based on the odds. And the way I treat these bets is, I don't care about these individual bets. I don't care if Donald Cerrone wins or loses. All I care about is consistently getting my money in strong positions. And there's a decent margin on Cerrone, so I'll bet him. Because over time, it doesn't matter if Cerrone wins or loses. Over time, if I get my money into these same sorts of positions, I'll crush it long term and make a big profit. But the problem when you're only getting a 4% margin over the bookies, like we are with Juan Adams here, is that there's not that much of a margin. You know, there's just not enough payoff, not enough reward for the risk you're putting up, because you will lose a lot of bets like this. You know, we're seeing Juan Adams being quite open about the fact that he's binging on junk food. So if he has, digestive issues tomorrow, if he faces a crash from all the sugar and shit he's eating, he might really underperform tomorrow and not perform well at all. So it is a risk. So at the current odds, for me, it's a pass. If Juan Adams was closer to 2.0 like Cerrone is, I would definitely bet him, because that would be a 10% margin over the bookies on where I cap him. But at the current odds, it's a reluctant pass. I do think Juan Adams wins, but I just don't think there's enough value there for me personally. So that is that fight out the way. So now we move on to the next fight that I want to talk about in today's video, or tonight's video, because it is now way past midnight, and I want to talk about Ayman Zahabi against Vince Morales. Now, the first thing I want to talk about with this fight is that Ayman Zahabi is returning to action after being out for almost 18 months. And usually when a fighter's been out for that long, it's not a good thing because of ring rest, but I actually think that Ayman Zahabi taking this long off since his fight against Ricardo Ramos was the best thing he could have done, because in this fight against Ramos, he suffered a devastating KO loss. It was a very, very bad knockout loss, one of the worst knockouts in 2017. It was absolutely brutal. They say that the worst knockouts are the ones you don't see coming, and Zahabi did not see the spinning back elbow coming. It was vicious, very, very brutal KO, very, very bad one. It was a career-changing KO, one of those really, really savage, nasty ones that is likely to have done long-lasting damage. So it's good to see Zahabi take 18 months off to give his brain time to heal, but the concerning thing is these kind of knockouts can change a fighter forever. It can make them lose their confidence. It it can really have a lasting effect on them. I mean, the best recent example I can think of on how a knockout can badly affect how a fighter performs in the future is James Vick. You know, if you were to go and watch James Vick's performances prior to his knockout against Justin Gaethje, which was also a very, very bad knockout, you see James Vick looking sharp, technical, fast, confident, explosive, whereas in his fight immediately following the Gaethje knockout against Paul Felder, he looked very fragile, very nervous, very hesitant, and that is what a very bad knockout loss can do to you. This knockout loss to Ramos was absolutely savage, and it's very possible Zahabi might bounce back and it might not affect him at all, but at the same time, a knockout like this can change a fighter forever. It's a lot of brain trauma, it knocks your confidence, it makes you think twice about, you know, coming forward and being aggressive, and that can have a big impact on a fighter's performance. And if we think about it, this was Zahabi's first loss. He was 7-0 before he was knocked out by Ramos, so Zahabi has no experience of dealing with this kind of knockout before. So, you know, whereas in the past Zahabi was very confident and aggressive, this might change him forever. This might put some doubt in his mind and change his fighting style, and he may not be anywhere near as effective now that he's got the doubt in his mind that he's not superhuman, and that at any given time he can have his lights shut off and he can be hurt very badly. So that's something definitely to consider in this fight. But this is a good fight for him to come back into, because Vince Morales isn't great. You know, there's nothing that special about him. He's just really a pure boxer. Likes to stay on the outside and box his opponents up, to be honest. But Zahabi's got decent striking, good distance management, good control of range, a good understanding of range, and I don't think Morales is going to cause Zahabi too many problems, because Morales likes to fight out on the outside and he's just purely a boxer. He doesn't really have any particular skills you can go to which would enable him to put his stamp on rounds. This is one of the problems that he's got, is that he fails to put his stamp on rounds. So doesn't hit particularly hard, although he does have a few knockout wins on his record when his past opponents have got overly aggressive and walked onto a big shot. But Zahabi doesn't really play that game. Zahabi's very technical, very measured, has a good understanding of distance. But Morales doesn't really go for takedowns or wrestling or anything like that, doesn't really have a clinch game, whereas Zahabi is a way more complete fighter, a much more complete mixed martial artist. He's a decently strong wrestler, very nice ground game, decent in the clinch, and very serviceable striking as well. Another thing I really like about Zahabi is that he's a very intelligent fighter, typical tri-star fighter that understands the importance of coming into a fight with a solid game plan and sticking to the game plan. I really, really like that about Zahabi. He understands the importance of winning rounds. He's not trying to go in there and get his opponent out of there. He is sticking to a game plan and focusing on putting his stamp on every round, so if the fight does go the distance, the judges give him the nod. And that is why I think he does definitely deserve to be the favourite here. If we have a look at the odds on Zahabi, he's around about a 1.67 favourite on average, which is minus 149 for an implied probability of 60%, and he should definitely be the favourite. I absolutely think he should be. If we look at the odds on Vince Morales, currently an average of around about 2.35, which is plus 135 for an implied probability of 43%. I think that's pretty accurate as well. The way I see this fight is, you know, anywhere else in the world, I think Morales would have a really good shot of winning this fight, because I do feel like he can make it close. You know, he's difficult to take down, difficult to hold down. Zahabi doesn't really use his wrestling that much anyway, and I think Morales can definitely make this fight close if he stays standing. Having said that, this fight is taking place in Canada. Ayman Zahabi is a Canadian fighter. He'll have home advantage on his side. We know the crowd will be behind him. We know the judges will be very biased towards Canadian fighters. So I think the best that Morales can really hope for in this matchup is making this a close fight. And if it is a close fight, 9 times out of 10, the judges are probably going to give Zahabi the nod, which makes this a tricky matchup for Morales. So I think the odds are spot on. I think Zahabi should be the favourite, but I wouldn't cap him at any higher than 60%, because Morales is decent standing and Zahabi doesn't go to his wrestling that much. But I do expect Zahabi to get the nod here. I don't expect him to blow Morales out the water, but he should definitely win a decision, and that's probably going to be a prop bet that I'm considering in the live stream tomorrow. Definitely interested in the odds on Zahabi to win by decision. So then, if we go into the final fight that I want to talk about in today's video, and also the final fight to talk about for this card. It is Cub Swanson against Shane Burgos. Now, normally when I research a card, there are quite a lot of underdog bets that interest me. But researching this card, there weren't really any underdogs that I came close to betting, apart from, of course, Donald Cerrone, who's only a slight underdog. But really, there's no underdogs at all that I've been tempted to bet on this card. I mean, if we just scan through it, Cole Smith, I was tempted to bet Cole Smith, but again, he's only a slight underdog. Wasn't tempted by Bhullar at all. Wasn't tempted by Nelson at all. Wasn't tempted by Prepelec. Wasn't tempted by Morales. Wasn't tempted by Miraz. Wasn't tempted by Barrio. Definitely wasn't tempted by Spivak. Definitely wasn't tested by Katona. Was tempted by Brunson, but needed a bit more value in the odds because of Theodorou's home advantage. And obviously we have got a small pre-fight bet on Cerrone, who is the slight underdog, although he was a bigger underdog when I put the bet out on Monday. But this fight between Cub Swanson and Shane Burgos, Cub is actually the only underdog that I strongly considered betting on this entire card. I think other than Donald Cerrone, Swanson is definitely the best. I would say, apart from Donald Cerrone, Swanson is the underdog on this card with the best chance of winning. That is basically what I would say, because Shane Burgos gets hit a lot. He fights with his hands low and he just gets hit a hell of a lot. We've seen him rocked and dropped in his last couple fights. Kurt Holloway dropped him before he picked up the armbar win. Holloway actually dropped him, jumped into Burgos' guard, and that was when Burgos was able to hit the armbar. And also we saw him knocked out against Calvin Kattar. Burgos is definitely there to be hit. He's very aggressive, stands in the middle of the octagon with his hands down low and walks his opponents down. And he also almost fights with like a T-Rex stance. He's literally got his chin out like this, inviting his opponents to hit him. And he does take a lot of shots. He does take a lot of damage. And obviously, Cub Swanson is a very high-level striker. And they do say, just like I said in the last fight, the shots that knock you out, the punches that really hurt you, are the punches that you don't see coming. And that is a big deal in this matchup, because Swanson is so unorthodox. He throws shots from really weird angles that you don't expect, and those are the kind of shots that can knock you out and put you away and hurt you bad. So that is why I do think Swanson is a live underdog and has a legit chance of beating Shane Burgos. And it also takes Burgos a while to find his range. He's never really that good in round one. He's a very slow starter, a bit like Donald Cerrone, and that's not so much of a problem in a 5-round fight. If Cerrone versus Iaquinta was a 3-round fight, I wouldn't recommend a bet on Cerrone because it takes him a while to get going, and Burgos is the same. But with this being a 3-round fight, I also feel like that favours Swanson, because Swanson can hit the ground running, whereas he'll probably take Burgos a while, a round to find his rhythm and find his range and really start fighting at his full potential. And also, with Burgos being a slow starter, one of the reasons why he's a slow starter is because it takes him a little while to find his range. And obviously, when you're facing a higher level, more unorthodox opponent like Swanson, it will naturally take you longer to find your range and work them out, because they're a much more complex puzzle to solve. So if both guys were to show up and fight to their full potential, I do think Cub Swanson would win. If I could be absolutely sure that Swanson would show up and perform like we know he can, like he performed against Doo Ho Choi, I would absolutely bet Swanson, no doubt about it. I think he would be a great bet. But the problem with Swanson is that I'm just not sure where his motivation is right now. I don't really want to throw any shade or cast any doubt on Swanson or question his credibility, but he is a training partner of TJ Dillashaw, and with Dillashaw's current PED issues, it appears he may have a long history of using PEDs. Being associated with Dillashaw, surrounding yourself by a guy like Dillashaw, being such a close training partner with Dillashaw, makes you wonder if Swanson was involved in any PED usage himself. And now with TJ Dillashaw getting busted, maybe Swanson's decided to stop using some of the stuff they were using for also fear of being caught. I'm not sure. I'm just showing some ideas out there. It's not an allegation. I don't want to call Swanson out, or he's never failed a drug test in his life. I'm sure he's a clean fighter. It's just something to think about, just a slight risk factor that might be present. But the more concerning thing that I find about Swanson is his motivation to keep fighting. Whenever you see him in his pre-fight interviews, he's always talking about wanting to take pro boxing fights, talking about signing with Zuffa Boxing, he's talking about his business interests outside the cage, talking about money. You never hear him talking about, title shots in his MMA career. It kind of just feels like he's going through the motions and turning up for paydays these days, which is never a good thing, because in Shane Burgos, you've got a young, hungry 28-year-old fighter that's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. He wants it bad. He's very motivated. Against Cub Swanson, 35 years old. He's had almost 40 pro fights. He's been in tons of wars. And at 35... he may as well be 135 in fight years for all the wars he's been in. The war against Du Ho Choi, the wars against Frankie Edgar where he had his jaw broken. He was knocked down and badly hurt against Renato Moicano. He's just been in tons and tons of wars. A big beating he took against Max Holloway. So Father Time might be starting to catch up with Cub Swanson, and that is why I am a little reluctant to bet him here, because as well in his past fights against his last three opponents, just hasn't looked great, to be honest. Hasn't looked as fast or sharp or as explosive as he did against Du Ho Choi. And his performance about a year ago against Frankie Edgar was particularly disappointing, because Frankie Edgar's not a particularly dangerous striker, not a particularly skilled striker. Frankie Edgar's main weapon has always been his relentless pace and his grappling. But this was a fight where Frankie Edgar outstruck Cub Swanson. He absolutely boxed his face off, which was a big surprise. Cub Swanson should not be getting outstruck by guys like Frankie Edgar. Now, obviously, I know Swanson would have been a little bit more reluctant to let his hands go for fear of being taken down, and the risk of the takedown won't really be there against Shane Burgos, who's more of a pure striker. But I just didn't like how someone like Edgar was able to outstrike Swanson. That shouldn't be possible. Swanson's a much higher level striker than Frankie Edgar. So that is also a bit of a concern. Where is Swanson's motivation at right now? So if we look at the odds from a betting perspective, currently the odds on Shane Burgos, they've improved today around about an average of 1.65, which is moneyline odds of minus 154 for an implied probability of 61%. There's no way I'd bet Shane Burgos in this fight. Like I say, Swanson is still dangerous. He's very unorthodox. He throws lots of shots from weird angles that you don't see coming. And Burgos fights with his hands low, gets hit a lot. He is definitely there to be hit. I do think Swanson can land some bombs on Burgos for sure. So if we look at the odds then on on Cub Swanson, currently you can get him at average odds are around about 2.35, which is plus 135 for an implied probability of 43%. So to get any real value on Cub Swanson here, you have to cap him at having a 50% or better chance of winning to be able to bet him here. And I'm not sure if I can cap him at that. I'm really not sure, because like I say, his motivation is a concern. He is on a decline, there's no question about it. Guys like Frankie Edgar wouldn't have been able to outstrike him in the past. Swanson also started really slow and didn't look great in the first half of the fight against Artem Lubov. And to be honest, there are quite a lot of similarities between Burgos' style and Lubov's style. Burgos fights with his hands low just like Lubov, likes to take control of century octagon like Lubov, and tries to walk you down like Lubov. So Burgos is essentially a bigger, better, badder, more technical, faster version of Artem Lubov. And it took a while for Swanson to get going in this fight. Didn't look great in the first half. So I don't quite cap Swanson at 50%, which I would need in order to bet him here. I think the odds are roughly accurate where they are, so it's an easy pass for me. I'm not going to bet this fight, but I do definitely think Cub Swanson is a live underdog. If you haven't got much money left in your DraftKings team, you're looking for an underdog to throw in there that may score you a boatload of points, I would definitely go for Swanson. And what I would say is Swanson is a tough mama jammer. He's very good defensively, very elusive, and I think it's unlikely that Burgos will be able to finish him. So even if it goes to decision, Swanson may bag you 15, 20, 30 points in DraftKings. I don't think it's going to be a total blowout fight. So that is it for tonight's video, guys. Invicta starts in 7 minutes, which I'm looking forward to. I'm going to go watch that. I hope you watch it as well. Support them. Don't illegally stream it. Support the fighters. Buy Fight Pass. And that is it. I hope you liked the video. Please hit the thumbs up button below if you did. Please also subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow 7 PM UK time for the live stream. Take care, guys, and have a good night.
Too many thoughts on my mind, I can't sleep at night, so I just keep writing. I don't need no help, I don't need opinions, so don't waste my time then. I just been living online, my city don't show me no love, and that's fine. Fuck local radio stations, I got more plays than all of these rappers combined. I'm going again, I've been going in, I'm fed up with so many things, I gotta just let it all out. I'm talking about the shit they've been talking about.